Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a very special guest. His name is William R. Kelly, and he just wrote a book in August 15th, 2021. The title of the book is The Crisis in America's Criminal Courts, Improving Criminal Justice Outcomes by Transforming Decision-Making. And Mr. Kelly is a professor of sociology and director of the Center for Criminology and Criminal Justice Research at the University of Texas at Austin. He has taught and conducted research in criminology and criminal justice for over 25 years and has published extensively on a variety of justice matters. And some of his other titles are The Future of Crime and Punishment, Smart Policies for Reducing Crime and Saving Money, published 2019, Confronting Underground Justice, Reinventing Plea Bargaining for Effective Criminal Justice Reform, published 2018, also From Retribution to Public Safety, Disruptive Innovation in American Criminal Justice, 2017. Also Criminal Justice at the Crossroads, Transforming Crime and Punishment, 2015. And then also Justice Under Pressure, a comparison of recidivism patterns among 4 successive parolee cohorts. That was published in 2012. But again, we're going to talk about this book, The Crisis in America's Criminal Courts. There's been some changes under Trump. We can talk about that and Mr. Kelly's position on how to improve criminal justice. So, Professor Kelly, are you there?
I am. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for agreeing to the interview. For people who may not have heard your background, can you talk about what led you to write this book, The Crisis in America's Criminal Courts?
I've been working in the area of criminal justice and criminology for about 30 years. In the past 10 years, I've been focusing primarily on what's wrong with the criminal justice system, and more importantly, how do we fix it? A lot of academics are quick to complain, but then they stop there. My mission has been to gather as much of the evidence-based research on effective reforms and put that together as a blueprint for essentially reinventing the American criminal justice system. I started out with the first couple of books were pretty broad, covered essentially everything except policing. And over time, as I've spent more and more time talking about various issues of the criminal justice system, my focus has become more and more narrow. And that narrowing has led me to focus much of the attention in terms of criminal justice reform on the criminal court system. I mean, the criminal justice system is loosely thought of in terms of law enforcement, the courts, and then corrections. All of those are important. All of those are fundamentally flawed. All of those are in desperate need of reinvention. But for my money, I think we can leverage a lot of the focus and resources in terms of fixing the criminal justice system by addressing issues related to the criminal courts.
Okay, can you expound on, in your intro, you talk about the current problems and how unfortunately unique the United States is in its criminal justice system. Can you talk about the current system and why it should be changed?
Yeah, everyone's heard, I shouldn't say everyone, most people have heard the term American exceptionalism. And that means a variety of things to a variety of people. It is also unfortunate that it applies to the American criminal justice system. We're the world's leader in terms of punishment. Obviously, we're a large country, so our numbers are higher. The number of people in prison are higher, but the rates of incarceration in the U.S. lead the world as well. For the past 50 years, we have followed essentially, and this is a generalization, but we've essentially followed one path, and that path has focused on punishment. That is, trying to punish bad behavior out of people, everything from minor, low-level misdemeanors to capital felonies. The remedy, the medicine, whatever you want to call it, has essentially been the same, which is punishment. And that punishment is often based upon retribution. I've heard some forward-thinking judges talk about anger-based decision-making. Johnny makes this, does this bad crime, and damn it, he deserves, retribution for that. The unfortunate reality is that as much sense as that makes, I mean, as you know, many in the public, at least historically, have believed that punishment makes sense. It's an easy sell by politicians, even today. I mean, Trump was the law and order president when he ran, wherever the hell that came from. You know, at a period of historically low crime rates, he saw some law and order problem. But it's been an easy sell, and it's been a logical sell that, you know, law and order, tough on crime, has been how we have gone about the business of American criminal justice. The unfortunate reality is that punishment doesn't work. It works on us. It works on non-offenders. I mean, we're all used to, you know, being punished or threatened, you know, with punishment by our parents or our peers or, you know, teachers or whomever. But what American policy, you know, writ large over the past 50 years fails to appreciate is that criminals are different than we are. And that what we respond to in terms of, you know, I don't want to do this because I'll get in trouble, doesn't work the same way for people who come from different circumstances. And that's really broadly what we're talking about here are what is it about criminal offenders that get them involved in crime in the first place? And
right. So what we've had in very recent times, you mentioned that 4.5 million people are in community supervision. Texas prison system has increased by 100,000, at least in the 7 years. And you have more people in jail, and also massive recidivism rates. And also you mentioned in your book, the First Step Act can you talk about the superficial effect of the First Step Act?
I think it's largely symbolic. It was an effort to try and release some federal inmates from federal prison. You know, I don't know what your audience knows about federal prison, but I mean, there is no parole. So when someone is sentenced to 10 or 12 years in federal prison, they do that full sentence. The First Step Act, the name is appropriate because it is only a first step, was an effort to try and mitigate the draconian approach to drug offending that the war on drugs has led to. So what the First Step Act purports to do is to release early certain drug offenders from federal prison, largely a product of the federal sentencing guidelines that mandated very stiff, often mandatory or mandatory minimum sentences for drug offenders. So it was a reasonable thought to sort of push back from, you know, do I have to serve this whole damn, 10 years here for, a little bit of, crack or meth or whatever. But, honestly, in the big picture, that's 1%. I mean, that's really, to call it a first step, I would call it a tiny first step.
It's accurate, right? But it also contains a theme within your book, which are these guidelines that judges have to abide by. But the federal system is only 10% of the U.S. justice system, and what happened only affected very small amounts. So the first step, just like you said, really doesn't cover what your ideas are, the vast amount of reform. And you talk about so many criminal offenders are different than us. They typically come from poverty and disadvantage. Can you talk about the prison population and its characteristics, current prison population?
Absolutely. Or even the offender population more broadly, they're all roughly the same. Just that some folks, end up in prison, others end up on probation or other forms of correctional control. It is in many respects the unfortunate of the world. I mean, I know some folks might say, well, this is just some liberal nonsense. But if you look at the characteristics of people who end up in the criminal justice system, we call them justice involved, the majority have a mental illness. The vast majority have a substance use disorder. Many of them have employment problems, educational deficits. As you mentioned, they come from backgrounds of poverty. And those circumstances lead to a variety of ways of seeing the world, thinking about the world, acting, making decisions about what to do, what not to do, what they see as options or alternatives. Be clear, I'm not making an apology for bad behavior. All I'm trying to do is help us understand better why people do it. I mean, consider this. How many times have we heard, when Johnny does something wrong, it's Johnny made a bad decision. And that's true. But if Johnny is under 25, that bad decision, more likely than not, is a product of the underdevelopment of the frontal lobe of his brain. I mean, neuroscience has taught us so much in the past 15, 20 years about behavior, and in particular criminal behavior. Much of it has to do with sort of the neurodevelopment of the brain, but also things like 60% of people in prison have had at least one traumatic brain injury. So a brain injury can clearly, I'm not saying they all, but can clearly lead to cognitive problems that then impact decision making that people engage in. So we kind of demonize offenders. These are the evil ones over here, and they all need retribution. But what that buys us is the fact that essentially every one of them will come back. The recidivism rate is 85%. That's an official rate. Those are the people that were caught. The true reoffending rate of people who've been through the criminal justice system at least once is much closer to 100%.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And I don't know, if there are any Fortune 500 companies that would still be in business if that was their price performance was 100% failure. And there are many other studies, not just looking at recidivism rates, but many other studies that establish the fact that punishment simply doesn't change behavior among criminal offenders as it does among the general population.
Right. So, I mean, you see this, but you also, you spoke about how this mental illness and drug use amounts to so much that it's almost like this mental illness becomes criminalized. So why there's problems here? Why aren't we I think that this is part of your point, is that we're not addressing some of these pre-existing things. Instead, we're criminalizing them. So what is can you compare the U.S. to some of these other countries around the world who don't have as much recidivism?
Absolutely. I mean, there are dozens of them. Many of them, are Western European allies. And people ask me all the time, what differentiates the U.S. from them? And one of the things is that they take seriously public health, which includes things like mental health. It includes things like substance abuse treatment. It's not that they don't have any crime at all; they do. But their way of thinking about it, the culture of their criminal justice system is so fundamentally different. It is not the waste can for people we don't know what to do with. I mean, that's where we are here in this country. We have made conscious decisions, we meaning policymakers, elected officials, that it is preferential, cheaper, whatever, to use prisons as mental health facilities, to use prisons as dumping grounds for people who have drug problems. If you look at Norway, if you look at Germany, if you look at any number of our Western European allies, they have well-established public health systems, and therefore, prison is not the first choice that people make when somebody, gets involved in some type of behavior that might be deemed criminal if they're mentally ill. I mean, here in this country, what do? We send the police, and in most jurisdictions, luckily in some. There are alternatives, but in most jurisdictions, the police show up. They don't know what the hell to do. They're not trained to deal with somebody who's in a mental health crisis. So what do? They arrest them. Then that starts the cycle all over again. And, it's the old metaphor of the revolving door. It's a series of conscious decisions that we have made in this country at all levels of government
Right, and it is interesting because when the police show up, then that creates the crime. Whereas if somebody else, other than maybe a mental health professional, there
Absolutely.
wouldn't be.
Absolutely. You see somebody showing up with, with body armor, Kevlar, a gun, a taser, who doesn't really understand, like a psychiatric social worker would understand what's going on. They don't know how to resolve a situation like that, how to diffuse a situation. And when the person in the crisis sees a gun and a bunch of cops, that often tends to escalate things. So yeah, it creates another crime, and that then justifies the police acting as if this is a typical criminal situation and taking the person in custody, and ultimately putting them in jail, which is about the worst thing you could do for someone in a mental health crisis.
Right, that's true. And then what happens is it kind of snowballs because the punishment, the crime, you say is criminogenic. Can you explain what that term means?
Yes, criminogenic means crime producing, crime facilitating. Brushing up against the criminal justice system has criminogenic consequences. That is criminal justice involvement. It's the fact of being in prison. This is one of those things that some people just, oh, you're making that up. But not only does prison not reduce recidivism, the evidence indicates it actually increases it. The fact of being in prison, and for a variety of reasons, leads to higher incarceration. Our use of jails for pretrial detention, the example I was talking about earlier with the person having a mental health crisis, or anyone else who's arrested for any other crime and booked into jail, there are negative consequences, criminogenic consequences for what is called pretrial detention. Pretrial detention is basically, judges making decisions, should this person, prior to the adjudication of their case, should they, be locked up, separated from society, or should we, let them go home, on bail or something like that? And just that time in jail, anything more than a day or two can have profound consequences on things like employment, housing, relationships, transportation. I mean, if you're in jail for a week, you could lose your job. Therefore, you lose your income. Therefore, you lose your apartment. Therefore, you lose your car. And all of those things conspire to lead, to increase the likelihood of future criminal activity.
Right. So it just creates more, you call it downstream consequences. And so you have these other models in Europe. Norway barely has any recidivism and should be an example for the U.S. What about these kind of guidelines? How have they added to the negative situation in the United States, sentencing guidelines?
Sentencing guidelines really take away any kind of no, they don't take all the discretion away, but they take most of the discretion away from the judge. They were developed, the first major set of guidelines were the federal sentencing guidelines, and they were developed in the 1980s and during the Reagan administration, at the height of the war on crime, at the height of the crack epidemic, when crack was first introduced into American cities. And, for a variety of reasons, two primarily. One was that, judges were perceived as being too lenient, and that there was the perception that when judges have discretion, they tend to discriminate. Those two problems had one solution in common, which was sentencing guidelines, that is, predetermined sentences, that essentially removes the judge from that decision-making process. And it's up to legislators, it's up to sentencing commissions to then, figure out, well, let's see, we got this crime and this criminal background. What's the appropriate punishment? 13 years. How do they come up with that? That's a whole nother story. But the result was the punishment is much more severe under sentencing guidelines, especially federal guidelines, but also in several states, than they were prior to that. So whatever the goal was, the ultimate outcome was harsher punishment.
Right. Yeah, I remember that here in California. It's the three strikes law. So
Yep.
once you get that third strike, bam, I think it's
Yeah.
automatic. Yeah, it takes away from the judge. I mean, can you talk about how the increase in population, what's happening in the U.S. criminal court system, and what's its solution?
Well, the title of the book is "The Crisis in the American Criminal Courts," and I mean that was a sort of almost a trick title because I think most folks realize that the courts are pretty crowded. Anyone who's had any experience sitting in a courtroom or being near a courtroom, it's just a parade of people, all kinds of things going on. I think people realize that the criminal justice system in general is overloaded, but in particular, their court dockets are full. Prosecutors constantly are concerned about their caseloads, things like that. The irony, the fact that the courts are so crowded, the irony is that that's a result not of increasing crime. I mean, they've gotten increasingly crowded over time, but over that same time period, crime has been declining to where we are today, which is essentially historically low crime. The culprit is recidivism. I mean, that's what keeps the American courts so clogged up. That's one crisis, but I think the bigger crisis is the inability of the court system to do anything, that's a bit extreme, to do what needs to be done to fundamentally change behavior and in turn reduce recidivism. It's really the key decision makers in the American criminal justice system. Yes, cops make the decision to arrest or not. That's important. And corrections folks, make decisions about, level of custody in prison or whatever. But the real key decisions are made by judges and prosecutors and sometimes public defenders. But the real key actors in the American criminal court system and therefore the crisis, in my mind, is the fact that the decisions that we make do not address the reasons people engage in crime in the first place.
Right. So it's that's a fundamental level of what is happening before to get them into the system, right?
Yeah, it's like moving cases. The job of a judge is to work the docket. The job of the prosecutor is to move cases. I mean, that's why we have 95% of all criminal convictions are based upon a plea negotiation.
Right.
People think, from Law and Order and in movies and all that you have your day in court and you have this dramatic trial and the truth will evolve from all this testimony. Well, that's fiction. It's fun to watch, but it's fiction. The reality is that judges have maybe 2 or 3 minutes to make a detention decision. They have maybe 5 minutes to conduct a plea agreement hearing. Same thing with prosecutors. I mean, they have, hardly any time to hammer out a plea deal. I mean, it's all pretty much automated. It's all, the enemy of this, the enemy of the court system is don't do anything different that would slow it down. And that's really where we had the head-on collision with the criminal justice system as we currently know it, and the criminal justice system that could fundamentally lead to positive outcomes, like not seeing people coming back. Seeing when somebody comes in with a mental health problem, diverting them somewhere other than sending them to jail, divert them to a mental health facility for someone who is drug involved. Whether they're caught in possession or whatever, but it turns out they have a drug problem. What the hell does putting them in jail do? I mean, not having drugs for 3 weeks is not the same thing as treatment. There's just fundamental misunderstandings about human behavior. I mean, judges know the law, they know criminal procedure. Prosecutors know the law, they know criminal procedure. None of them really know nearly as much as they need to, given their positions, about human behavior and what leads to certain types of behaviors and what can change behaviors.
Why do you think that all of those, that the society or the legislatures, either federally or state, are avoiding all of those things and criminalizing these behaviors? How did that happen, and why is it still happening?
It happens because I think there's some justification in when people do something wrong, they should be punished. It's that Protestant ethic logic, and that's again what has driven criminal justice policy. So I mean, I have to think that that there's that culture that drives it, but there's also the belief that mental health treatment is fundamentally expensive, and that drug treatment is fundamentally expensive. And who's going to pay for it? Is it the state? Is it the local jurisdiction? Is it the federal government? And honestly, if they would sit down for a minute and realize that the cost benefit analyses clearly show that treatment is less expensive than detention in jail or incarceration. Now, that's not to say that treatment is always going to be successful. I mean, clearly there will be certain, situations where it doesn't work for whatever reasons. But, our go-to solution is lock them up rather than treat them. The other thing that policymakers rarely think about, and that is recidivism. Every time, let's say I have a heroin problem, and I get arrested in possession of a relatively minor amount of heroin, but it's still a jailable offense. So rather than send me to treatment, they send me to jail. I do my time. I get out, and am I better? No, nothing's changed. I mean, what am I going to do when I get? What's the first thing I'm going to do? Everybody says the same thing: more heroin. Why? Because nothing. I mean, nothing's different. So every time I reoffend, and chances are it's going to be numerous times, all those costs are incurred again. I mean, the fundamental reality here is when you sort of lift the curtain and realize that what this focus on punishment and the failure of punishment to effectively reduce recidivism does is sends a huge bill to the public. I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, every time I reoffend, it's police time and money. It's jail time. It's the municipal judge's time for deciding whether I should be detained in jail. It's prosecutor. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So recidivism has costs, not only in terms of crime and victimization, but also in terms of taxpayer dollars.
Right. And it seems like there's no broad angle look at the criminal courts. Everybody has his own cog or place, the judge, the cops, the prosecutor, but they're not making it efficient or sensible anymore. It's almost like they're not involved in the reform. What reforms do you think, I mean, it's a big question, what reforms do you need to take place to make it more efficient and decrease recidivism?
Well, I think the focus on the courts, I mean, there are many answers to that. But since the topic here is the court system, I think one very broad but extraordinarily difficult solution is to help judges and prosecutors and defense counsel make better decisions that lead to successful outcomes. We treat everybody, the criminal justice system essentially treats everybody the same. There are some exceptions. There are drug courts you may have heard of around the country where that's a diversion program where people can go and get treatment. Those are the exception. The vast majority of all people that come into the system are on the same assembly line, and it's the same routine of decisions that are being made. And everyone knows where this is going to go. It's going to be, arrest, pretrial detention, plea deal, and then prison time or probation or something like that. And no one takes a breath and says, "Why the hell is this person here? What is about this person that leads him to commit this crime?" I mean, that's the whole idea. If you stop and ask that question, the fear is the criminal court system will collapse. So a couple of books ago, that I wrote with a federal judge friend of mine and a psychiatrist, we came up with the idea of developing expert panels of psychologists, psychiatrists, MDs, clinical social workers, individuals who have the expertise to screen and assess individuals when they come into the system, to better understand why they're there, and to better then advise prosecutors and judges on, what is the best strategy here in terms of balancing public safety on the one hand and reducing the likelihood of recidivism on the other. Those questions just aren't asked on a daily basis in the American court system.
Right.
Now,
right. How many drug cases are really a danger to the public? If they're only harming themselves, why are they behind bars? And you're right. I think it goes back to the Protestant worldview, the Protestant ethic, but it doesn't seem to fit the modern thing, both for justice and, I would say, efficiency, financial efficiency.
Absolutely. I mean, if people realized how much money was being wasted, we've spent $1 trillion over the past 45 years. $1 trillion. I'm not even sure how many zeros are there, but $1 trillion just on punishment. I'm not talking about the police. I'm not talking about the courts. I'm talking about prisons and jails. We spent another $1 trillion on the war on drugs over the past 45 years. And you sit back and say, well, what have we bought for that? And I'm glad I'm not the one who has to defend, those choices, because the answer, ain't very pretty.
Right. It's not solved anything.
Yeah, it's not a report card you want to take to your parents. That's for damn sure. So part of the solution is better decision making. Part of the solution, obviously, is trying to slow down, the decision making in the courts. But the key is in part better information, but also and a number of other things. But the really big one is changing how we think about crime and punishment, changing the culture of the criminal justice system. The irony here is the public gets it. If you look at public opinion, and this has been the case for the past at least 15 years, the public says, we think prisons should be used not to punish, but to rehabilitate. We think the point of the criminal justice system is to reduce recidivism. If policymakers would listen to the public, I know that's a big wish, they would get a better idea. I mean, where does that come from? From the perspective of the public? It should be the foundation. The foundation of criminal justice should be reducing crime and recidivism. You were talking about Norway earlier, or Germany. I mean, just in terms of thinking about crime and punishment, the moment somebody arrives in a German prison or a prison in Norway, they begin the process of preparing them to leave. That is, starting the process of, thinking about what is it going to take in the short time you're going to be here, because prison sentences are pretty short in those countries. What is it going to take? What are you going to need to be prepared to leave here to lead a more productive life, a crime-free life? In this country, our culture is more punishment, the better. So the other issue is we need to, readjust our thinking, meaning the criminal justice system, the culture of that, to focus on success. I mean, success is not putting somebody in prison, although the average prosecutor today advocates for tougher and tougher punishment. I mean, the most recent survey I saw like from 3 months ago, the average prosecutor is in the trenches fighting for harsher and harsher punishment. In the state legislature or on a day-to-day basis in performing their functions as a prosecutor.
Yeah, it's incredible. There's a huge difference between here and Europe, where you sit down, you get retrained in maybe computer science or something like that. The jails look like a country club. There's no fences, if there's a fence at all.
Yeah.
And here you're in kind of a pain facility or something where you just get brutalized.
You get brutalized. You get your liberty deprived from. I mean, your liberty taken away, and then you're released and you're expected to toe the line. When the law says in Texas, this is an irony. In Texas, they will train you in the prison system to be a barber. But once you get out, being a barber is one of over 100 occupations for which a felon who has been released from prison may not be lawfully certified or licensed to work in.
That doesn't make any sense. I'm not surprised, though.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that whole, why should we let them work in, occupations where they might be near people that could be dangerous? Well, rather than applying that to everybody coming out of prison, why don't we make better decisions about who might be higher risk, being an elevator repairman? I mean, the list is really pretty silly when you look at it. Or the guy that cleans your pool, or it's just this wholesale, again, culture of punishment, and the punishment never ends. That's
right.
And then you realize, well, why the hell did he reoffend? Well, he reoffended because he's still addicted to heroin and he can't get a job.
Do you ever get this sense of this is kind of like an enforcement of a class system where maybe people view these people should be in a lower class and stigmatized for their lives? Like, do you think that maybe that comes from either the Protestant ethic or something about that? Because it just seems very merciless that you're almost like turning them into a caste system of untouchables.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and I think that's related to poverty. I mean, I think people look down on those. It's the old Protestant ethic again. Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Easy to say if you ain't born in poverty, but again, when poverty is correlated with many other factors, including educational deficits, employment deficits, mental health problems, emotional problems, drug use. I mean. And then there's this tendency to want to demonize poor people, and many of them are minorities. And you have to go as far as Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow to appreciate that there's a huge racial component to all this, and race and poverty are correlated, so that aggravates that situation. So I mean, a lot of it is us versus them. And, we've been seeing a lot of that lately.
Right.
And I think the criminal justice system is just another example of a wedge that's used to divide large groups of citizens. And those that are unfortunate enough to be in circumstances that get them involved in criminal activity. Again, I'm not apologizing for crime, but I mean, if we appreciate the circumstances, it just perpetuates.
Right. It's a self-perpetuating unjust system, and it doesn't solve anything. It doesn't. Yeah, that's really the takeaway. It's
like a perpetual motion machine.
Yeah.
Because you got the old revolving door just keeps revolving, and you let them out, they come back. You let them out, they come back, and that's the story.
Yeah, it's sad. Well, that's a great interview. Thanks so much for sharing that book. Where's the best place for people to buy it? We're almost at about 40 minutes.
Amazon has it, and I'm sure the other major booksellers have it.
And do you have social media if anybody wants to reach out to you? Or where's the best place to go?
I have a website, williamkellyphd.com. That's
williamkellyphd.com.
Yeah.
Put that in the show notes.
Great.
I'll look right on the screen, williamkellyphd.com. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So people can reach out to you if they have any questions. I mean, it's just the system doesn't make any sense. The jails are for profit, so this system perpetuates another one.
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
like a Rube Goldberg device or something.
It is, and it's an extraordinarily expensive one.
Yeah, and I mean, just for people who are so concerned about efficiency or the market or whatever, this is the opposite of that. This is the worst way you could spend your money, in my opinion.
Yeah, what I often say is if this was a Fortune 500 company, it would have been delisted,
Right.
decades ago.
Yeah, no, yeah, very well said. Well, great interview. Thank you so much again. The name of the author is William R. Kelly. Title of the book is The Crisis in America's Criminal Courts: Improving Criminal Justice Outcomes by Transforming Decision Making, published August 15th, 2021. Thank you so much, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks. All right, stay there.